The first sign that something was wrong came long before the rich man understood it. It started on a warm, quiet evening when the sun dipped low across the wide fields and turned the sky into a deep shade of red. The ranch hands were heading back toward the stables, tired from the long day, and the horses were settling in for the night. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The finest stallion on the property, the one the man trusted more than any other, refused to stay still. The horse kept pacing at the far end of the corral, lifting his head every few seconds as if listening to something no one else could hear. His behavior drew attention because he had never acted that way before. He was known for his calm strength and steady temperament, yet that night he seemed unsettled in a way that made even the experienced hands uneasy. The rich man, who had built his life on logic and control, noticed the horse's strange behavior from the porch of his large home. With the evening breeze touching his shoulders, he narrowed his eyes and tried to figure out what could be bothering the stallion. He had lived long enough to know that animals often sense things long before people did. Still, this felt different. There was no storm coming, no predator lurking, no sound across the open land that he could hear. The ranch was silent except for the steady hum of insects and the soft rustle of grass. Yet the horse kept lifting its head sharply, snorting, and pawing at the ground as if trying to warn him of something. The man walked down toward the corral, his boots pushing through the dust. As he approached, the stallion stopped pacing and fixed its eyes directly on him. The man had seen many looks in his life, from sincere trust to silent judgment, but this look was something else entirely. It carried urgency, almost like a plea. He paused by the fence and rested his hand on the top rail. The horse let out a low, uneasy sound. The man felt something shift inside him. He had always prided himself on understanding people more than animals, using instinct to guide business deals and decisions. But right then, it felt like the horse understood something he didn't, something important. The ranch hands gathered behind him, unsure whether to speak. They whispered among themselves, wondering if the horse was sick or if some hidden danger was nearby. Yet nothing around them suggested trouble. The air felt calm. The land looked peaceful. There was no wind picking up, no strange shadows moving in the distance. Still, the horse's behavior continued to draw everyone's attention. The rich man finally stepped through the gate and moved closer. The stallion backed up, but not out of fear. Instead, it was as if the horse was trying to lead him somewhere. The man followed a few steps before stopping. A cold feeling crept through him, even though the night was still warm. Something was out there, something he could not see. And somehow, the horse knew what it was. He stood quietly, letting the silence stretch across the corral. His breath mixed with the horse's breath in the cooling air, and he felt a strange connection he couldn't explain. The stallion let out a sharp sound, then turned its head toward the far end of the property. The man's eyes followed the direction of the horse's gaze. The fence line stretched all the way to the edge of the woods. Beyond it lay land he rarely visited, a place he had purchased but never truly cared about. He always told himself he had enough on his plate without wandering through wild patches of trees and thickets. That part of the ranch was left untouched, mostly because it didn't serve any purpose in his life. He owned it for the sake of ownership, nothing more. But now, seeing the horse staring at it with such intensity, he felt a pull he couldn't brush off. When night fully settled, he returned to the house, but sleep refused to come. He lay in the large room he had decorated with expensive furniture, listening to the quiet, trying to shake the strange feeling that the horse had placed in his mind. He told himself he was being foolish, letting an animal's nervousness affect him, but the feeling stayed. The image of the horse's eyes refused to fade. By the time morning arrived, he knew he had to look into it. Not because he was worried about the horse, but because he couldn't go on ignoring a feeling that strong. He woke before sunrise, pulled on his coat, and headed straight to the stables. The stallion stood alert, waiting for him. The horse nudged its head gently against his arm, as if encouraging him. That single touch confirmed everything he had felt the night before. Something out there needed his attention. He saddled the horse himself, even though he usually left such tasks to the hands. Today felt different. He wanted no distance between himself and the horse that had tried so hard to warn him. They rode out as the first light crept across the land. The air was crisp, and the fields looked calm, but the horse's muscles stayed tense beneath him. As they approached the edge of the property, the stallion slowed, then stopped. The man scanned the area and noticed something odd. The ground near the woods looked disturbed, not by an animal, something heavier. The prints were faint, but deep enough to catch his eye. His heart beat a little faster, though he didn't yet understand why. He dismounted and crouched beside the strange marks. The soil was cracked in a way he had never seen on this land. It almost looked like the ground had shifted during the night. The horse stepped closer and let out a soft sound. The man touched the cracks with his fingers and felt a warmth that didn't make sense. The morning air was cool, yet the ground felt as if it had been touched by heat. He stood and scanned the area again. It was too quiet, and the woods ahead seemed darker than usual. He took a few steps toward the trees, but the stallion blocked him, gently nudging him back. The horse wasn't trying to stop him out of fear. The man could feel that. Instead, it was guiding him, urging him to look around instead of rushing forward. He circled the clearing and began noticing more signs. The trees near the edge had leaves curled and dry, as though something had brushed against them. Small branches were snapped in clean, unusual ways, not like something an animal would do. Everything pointed to an event that didn't quite fit the natural rhythm of the land. He walked deeper into the clearing until he saw something that froze him in place. A faint shimmer across the soil caught the sunlight in a strange way. He bent down and saw a thin layer of dust that looked different from the earth around it. The dust glimmered with a dull metallic tone, something he had never seen on his ranch. His breath caught as he realized he had no explanation for what he was looking at. The stallion stayed close, matching his movements with steady patience. The rich man had built his life on facts, decisions, and strict control of everything he owned. But this moment shattered that sense of certainty. The horse had not been reacting to fear or restlessness. It had sensed this, whatever it was. Something hidden, something unexpected, something that didn't belong on his land. He stood slowly, staring at the tree line, wondering what waited beyond the shadows. For the first time in years, he felt small against something unknown. He reached for the reins as the horse let out another soft sound, urging him to leave the area for now. He mounted but kept his eyes fixed on the woods. The truth behind the horse's behavior was no longer a simple question. It was the beginning of something larger, something that might change everything he thought he knew about his land and himself. As they rode back toward the stables, the wind shifted, carrying a faint, strange scent across the field. The man turned sharply, knowing he had just gotten his first glimpse of a truth that was waiting to surface. And whatever it was only the beginning. When the man returned to the ranch, the world around him looked the same, yet everything inside him felt different. The morning sun had warmed the fields and painted the barns with a soft glow, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into something far bigger than he understood. The stallion walked beside him with a steady rhythm, calmer now, almost relieved. It was as if the horse believed that showing him the strange marks and the warm ground had been the first step toward something important. But important in what way, he still couldn't grasp. He put the horse back in the stable and gave it fresh water, but even ordinary tasks felt heavy. The ranch hands noticed he was quieter than usual. Some asked if he wanted breakfast prepared, others asked if they should check the fence line or the woods, but he waved them off. He knew that sending them into the trees would only stir gossip, and he wasn't ready to share what he had seen. For now, he needed time to think. The ranch was full of work, yet his attention drifted back toward the woods with every passing minute. He had spent years shaping his land to match his plans, investing money into its growth and shaping every inch to serve some purpose. But he had never paused to look beyond the surface or consider what lay deeper. He always saw the land as something to control, something to profit from, something predictable. Now, for the first time, he sensed that the land had its own story, one he had never bothered to listen to. And the horse, with its strange behavior and sharp instincts, seemed to understand that story better than he did. By midday, he walked toward the main house and sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The warmth of the mug calmed his hands, but his mind refused to settle. He found himself thinking back to the horse's troubled movements, the uneasy pacing, the strange ground markings, and the shimmering dust. Each memory felt like a piece of a puzzle. He wondered if the horse had seen something, heard something, or sensed something beyond human perception. The idea felt odd, yet not impossible. Animals had a way of reading the world differently. He finally decided he couldn't sit still any longer. He walked back to the stable and checked on the stallion again. The horse stood alert, watching him with an intensity that felt almost human. The man placed his hand gently on the horse's neck and whispered something he hadn't said in years. He asked for guidance. It felt strange to rely on an animal for answers, but deep inside, he knew the horse had become his link to whatever truth lay hidden out there. For the rest of the day, he tried to return to his usual routine, overseeing ranch tasks, checking supplies, and coordinating with the workers. But his attention drifted again and again. Even the ranch hands noticed his distraction. One of them approached him late in the afternoon, asking if something had happened. He brushed it off, saying he didn't sleep well. But even that wasn't enough to ease the tension. There was something in his eyes that none of them had seen before, a quiet worry that didn't fit his normally controlled presence. As daylight faded and evening settled in, he found himself drawn back toward the stables. The stallion was restless again, not pacing this time, but shifting its weight from one leg to the other, glancing toward the woods as if waiting for another signal. The man leaned against the stall door, listening to the steady breathing of the horse and the hum of night insects outside. He felt a strange connection forming, stronger than anything he had expected. It was as though the horse wasn't just warning him, it was trusting him to find answers. Hours passed before he finally left the stable and walked back to the house, but sleep still wouldn't come. He tossed in bed, replaying every detail. He kept wondering why the ground had been warm when everything else was cool, why the dust shimmered like metal, why the trees had snapped in such clean lines. Nothing added up. By the time morning came again, he felt more unsettled than before. He saddled the stallion once more and headed toward the woods, but this time he approached from a different direction. He wanted to see if anything had changed. As they rode through the tall grass, he noticed something new. Birds flew in odd patterns above the trees, circling without landing as if disturbed by something on the ground. He slowed the horse and listened closely. The forest usually carried a steady rhythm of wind and animal movement, but the air was strangely still. Even the insects seemed quieter. When he reached the clearing, he dismounted carefully. The stallion stayed close, nudging his shoulder with quiet urgency. He walked toward the cracked ground, but the shimmering dust was gone. The warm soil had cooled, leaving only faint marks behind. He crouched and touched the ground again. This time it felt normal. He frowned. Something had happened here, and whatever caused it had either moved or vanished entirely. He walked deeper into the woods, following the broken branches and flattened brush. The trail was subtle but noticeable if someone looked closely. He kept his senses alert, listening for any movement. The light filtering through the trees cast long shadows on the ground, making everything look uncertain. After a few minutes, he spotted another odd detail. One of the tree trunks had a long scrape running down its side, not caused by claws or tools. It looked more like the bark had burned away in a thin line. He touched it gently and felt a slight roughness. The horse snorted behind him, then stepped back slightly. He turned around and saw the stallion's ears pinned, its gaze fixed on something deeper in the woods. The man followed the direction of the stare but saw nothing. Still, he trusted the horse's sharp instincts. He took a step back, choosing not to press too far into unknown territory. There was no need to take unnecessary risks. Whatever had caused the disturbance was not something he wanted to stumble upon unprepared. When he returned to the ranch, he felt a mixture of relief and frustration. He knew something was out there, something unusual, something the horse had sensed long before he did. But he still had no answers. The workers noticed him returning from the woods and exchanged worried looks. They could tell he was keeping something from them, though none dared ask. The ranch had been running smoothly for years, and seeing their employer burdened by something they couldn't understand left them uneasy. As sunset approached, he fed the stallion and stayed in the stable longer than usual. He watched the horse's steady movements and listened to the quiet rhythm of nighttime settling in. Every now and then the horse would turn toward the woods, its ears twitching as if listening for something. The man knew that whatever was happening, he was not imagining it. The land was trying to tell him something, and the horse was the messenger. Later that night, while the workers slept, he sat on the porch again. The air was cooler, and the stars stretched across the sky in a wide, glowing pattern. He found himself thinking about his life. He had spent years surrounded by wealth, comfort, and certainty, but none of those things mattered now. What mattered was understanding why the horse reacted the way it did. What mattered was figuring out what had disturbed the land. What mattered was facing whatever truth waited in the shadows of the woods. While he sat deep in thought, the stallion let out a sudden sound from the stable. It wasn't loud, but it carried urgency. The man stood at once, his heart tightening. He walked quickly toward the stable, the quiet night air broken only by the crunch of gravel under his boots. When he reached the stallion, the horse was wide awake, staring straight at the woods again. Its stance was firm, not frightened, but alert in a way that told him something had changed. He followed the horse's gaze, and though he couldn't see anything in the darkness, he felt a chill move through him. The woods were out there, holding secrets he had not yet uncovered, secrets that seemed to grow deeper with every passing hour. He placed a hand on the stallion's neck and felt the horse's heartbeat, steady but tense. Whatever truth the horse had sensed, it hadn't gone away. It was getting closer. The next morning came slower than usual, as if the sky itself was trying to ease into the day after everything that had already shaken the ranch. The rich man rose before the sun fully cleared the horizon, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside with a kind of heaviness in his chest that he couldn't name. The cool air brushed against him while the dust still slept on the ground, and the ranch felt strangely quiet. Even the birds seemed unsure about calling out. He headed straight for the stables, driven by a mix of worry and curiosity that had been burning in him since the night before. The memory of the horse's restless behavior lingered in his mind, and now he watched for any sign that whatever trouble had stirred the animal was still close. When he reached the barn door, he paused. Inside, he could hear the soft shuffle of hooves and an occasional snort, like whispering reminders that something was not right. He stepped in and found the horse wide awake, ears pricked and eyes locked toward the far end of the barn. The horse had not forgotten the fear from the night before. It stood tense, the way an animal does when it knows danger is nearby long before people sense it. The rich man moved closer and placed a hand on the side of the horse's neck, hoping to calm it, but the tension did not ease. Instead, the horse shifted its weight, nudging him toward the barn door as if insisting he follow some direction it already understood. He hesitated, unsure if he should trust the strange instinct the animal seemed to carry. Every part of him wanted to believe the horse's reaction had been caused by something simple, something ordinary. After all, there were plenty of noises and shadows on a ranch that could unsettle an animal. But deep down, he felt too uneasy to brush it aside. The behavior was too sharp, too focused, too deliberate to ignore. Outside, the ranch hands were starting their morning tasks, moving feed, checking fences, and getting ready for another long day. They greeted him lightly, but he was barely listening. His attention kept drifting back to the barn and the path beyond. He knew he had to do something more than just stand around waiting for answers to show themselves. By the time the sun fully rose, he saddled one of the calmer horses and rode out toward the wooded area behind the ranch, a place rarely visited. The air was cool in the shadows of the trees, and the sound of hooves thudding on the soil filled the silence. As he rode deeper in, he noticed subtle signs of disturbance in the land. A broken branch here, a patch of soil that looked freshly kicked up, and tracks that didn't match anything he recognized. Something had passed through recently, something that didn't move like livestock or wild deer. He dismounted and knelt beside the tracks, brushing his fingers lightly across the ground. They were spaced in a way that suggested someone had been moving fast. The prints were uneven, like the person kept glancing over their shoulder or stumbling as they went. The rich man rose slowly, eyes narrowing as he followed the trail further. His horse stayed close, nudging him once, as if reminding him it was still there for protection. The trail eventually led him to a small clearing he barely remembered. It wasn't used for anything except old scraps of broken fencing and empty barrels. Yet something new lay there now, something that didn't belong. He spotted a piece of torn fabric caught on a broken nail and picked it up. The cloth was rough, worn thin, and had a strange dark mark across one edge. It felt like a warning left behind by someone who didn't intend to be found. He slipped the fabric into his pocket and took another long look around, trying to understand what sort of trouble could be hiding behind quiet signs like these. Nothing explained the horse's panic from the night before, but the pieces began to push him toward a truth he couldn't yet grasp. When he returned to the ranch, he found one of the older ranch hands waiting for him. The man looked uneasy and held his hat in both hands like he was preparing for bad news. He explained that a few of the outer fences had been tampered with. Not broken by animals, but cut clean through. It looked intentional. The rich man felt the tension deepen inside him. He had built his life on order, control, and understanding every inch of his land. Yet now things were happening in the shadows of his own ranch, and the clues pointed toward a person, not some wild creature. Someone had been moving in and out of his land without permission. That idea alone unsettled him more than anything. He wondered if the strange truth the horse had sensed was connected to something from his past, something he had overlooked, something returning now in silence. Throughout the day he tried to focus on his usual work, but his thoughts drifted back to the tracks in the woods and the torn piece of fabric. He carried it with him everywhere, turning it over in his pocket like a reminder that the ranch was holding secrets he hadn't yet uncovered. Every so often he glanced around as if expecting someone to step out from behind a fence or from one of the old sheds. Later that evening he returned to the barn. The restless horse stood near the gate, waiting for him, as though it had something more to show. He approached slowly, noting how the horse watched him with sharper attention than usual, almost as if it had been waiting for him to understand what it had tried to tell him before. He rested a hand on the horse's muzzle and felt the warm breath against his palm. The horse leaned closer, brushing his shoulder with a soft push. Then, just as before, the animal stepped back and turned its head toward the open field near the far fence, the same direction from which the strange tension had seemed to rise the night before. The rich man stepped outside and gazed across the field. The wind carried a faint sound from the distance, something he couldn't fully catch. It wasn't an animal call, nor the rustle of the grass. It was softer, more human. Maybe a voice carried on the wind, or maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. He stood there, hands at his sides, feeling a shift inside him that he couldn't explain. The horse stayed close, watching the horizon. The ranch felt different now, as if the land itself knew what was coming long before he did. The strange behavior of the horse was no longer something he could ignore. The warning signs on the land were no longer something he could dismiss. Something was happening, something real, and it was tied to the truth he still hadn't uncovered. He turned his eyes toward the fading light and felt the weight of a question growing larger inside him. Whatever waited out there in the quiet distance was moving closer, and soon he would have no choice but to face it. The horse seemed to sense it too, shifting its stance as if bracing for whatever came next. And though the rich man didn't yet know what the truth was, he could feel it moving toward him, slow and steady, ready to change everything he had ever believed about his land, his life, and the world he thought he controlled. The night drew in around him, quiet and tense, holding the unanswered questions in its dark arms while he stood waiting for a truth he was not ready for but could no longer avoid. The rich man barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the strange tracks in the dirt, the cut fences, and the torn cloth. But more than that, he saw the horse staring into the distance with a kind of knowing fear that no animal should carry alone. By the time the first light crept across the sky, he was already outside, boots tied, coat on, ready to face whatever waited in the far fields. The air felt cooler than usual, carrying a quiet that didn't seem natural. Even the wind held itself back, as though trying not to disturb what was coming. He walked to the barn, expecting the horse to be restless again, but instead the animal waited calmly at the gate, head low, breathing slow. It felt like the calm before a storm, not peace but a sharp pause, the kind that settles only when something heavy is about to break open. He stroked the horse gently, feeling the smooth tension in its muscles. The horse lifted its head toward him. There was no wild panic this time, only something steady and serious, almost urging him not to turn away. He understood it in a way he couldn't explain. The horse wanted him to see the truth for himself, not wait for it to reach the ranch on its own terms. He saddled up and guided the horse out into the open fields. The sky was brightening, but the light felt thin, like the sun was hesitant to shine too boldly over what lay ahead. He rode toward the far fences, where the land dipped into a narrow valley sheltered by tall brush. The ranch hands usually avoided that stretch because the land shifted too much after rain. It was a place that felt forgotten, even on the busiest days. The closer he got, the more signs he began to notice. Twigs snapped in lines that looked too neat to be made by animals. Grass bent in a way that showed someone had knelt there recently. Then he found the marks of a campfire near the base of an old leaning oak. It had been put out in a hurry, leaving just enough ash to reveal that someone had been using it. His heart tightened in his chest. Someone had been living on his land without his knowing it, and not just passing through. They had been hiding, watching, moving with care. The fact that the horse sensed it long before he did made the situation feel even heavier. He dismounted and walked through the brush, each step slow and careful. The horse stayed behind him, ears turning in every direction as though listening for dangers he couldn't hear. A faint trail of footprints led farther into the valley. They were lighter this time, almost careful enough to disappear, but still present. He followed them toward a cluster of rock formations that cast deep shadows across the ground. As he neared the rocks, he noticed something that sent a chill through him. A small bundle lay hidden between two thick stones, wrapped in cloth. He crouched down and opened it. Inside were a few belongings that looked worn beyond their years, a small pouch of old coins, a dull pocket knife, and a piece of folded paper. He unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was torn at the edges, stained, but still readable. The writing inside was cramped and rushed, as if written in fear. It wasn't a letter, more like a desperate note. He read it twice, trying to make sense of it. Most of the message was unclear, but two lines caught his eye. One said that someone had no place else to go. The other said they were running from something that had followed them across counties. He sat back and tried to breathe steady. Someone had come to his land not to cause harm but to escape it, but escape from what? And why hide instead of seeking help? He stood up and scanned the valley again. The silence felt too thick to be harmless. He walked deeper into the shadows cast by the rocks. A gust of wind pushed against him, carrying with it a faint sound that made him freeze. It was a cough, weak and muffled, as if someone was trying hard not to be heard. He turned slowly toward the source. His heart pounded as he moved around the rock wall. Behind it, in a small hollow carved by time and weather, someone sat huddled against the stone, a thin blanket wrapped around their shoulders. Their face was hidden, but he could see how their hands shook. He didn't move any closer at first. He just stayed still, letting the weight of the moment settle. The person lifted their head slowly, and he saw the tired, guarded eyes of someone who had spent too many nights running. The fear in those eyes didn't seem directed at him, but at whatever they believed was on their trail. The rich man opened his mouth to speak, but the person flinched, pulling the blanket tighter. He lifted both hands in a calm gesture, showing he meant no harm. The horse took a slow step forward behind him, lowering its head as if it recognized the person, or at least the fear inside them. After a long silence, the person whispered something he couldn't catch. Their voice shook, and they looked as though speaking cost them strength they barely had. He stepped a little closer, keeping his voice low and steady. He assured them they were safe, or at least safer than wherever they had come from. But the person shook their head weakly. They pointed behind the valley toward the open plains that stretched far beyond the ranch. He followed their gesture and saw nothing but land and sky. Still, the person's trembling hand suggested they believed something was out there, something coming closer. He asked who or what they were running from, but the person only murmured fragments. They said someone had been tracking them for weeks. They said every time they thought they had escaped, they would see signs that someone was still behind them. They said they came to the ranch because it felt like the only place left where they might not be found. The rich man felt a deep pull inside him. This wasn't the type of trouble he had expected. It wasn't a thief or a stranger plotting something against the ranch. It was someone desperate, someone scared, someone carrying a secret so heavy that even the land seemed to bow under its weight. He offered to take them back to the ranch where they could rest and recover. At first they resisted, shaking their heads, saying the ranch would be put in danger if they stayed, but their strength was nearly gone. When they tried to stand, their legs gave out beneath them. He caught them before they fell, and the fear in their eyes softened just a little, enough for them to trust him, enough to lean on him as he helped them onto the horse. The horse stood steady, understanding the importance of the moment. As he guided them back toward the ranch, he felt the tension follow like a shadow. The land seemed to watch them pass, whispering hints of danger that had not yet shown itself fully. The wind grew stronger, pushing against them as though warning them to hurry. When they reached the ranch yard, a few of the workers looked up in surprise. No one said anything at first, only watched as he helped the weakened stranger down from the horse. He asked one of the workers to fetch water and another to prepare a quiet room. The stranger looked around as if expecting someone to jump out from behind a wall, but slowly their breathing steadied. Still, the rich man's unease only grew. Bringing the stranger inside didn't solve anything. It only made the invisible trouble feel closer. The horse paced outside the barn, restless again, kicking gently at the dirt as though it sensed something closing in on the ranch. As the sun began to lower, he stepped outside and looked toward the plains. The horizon stretched far, but he felt something pressing against it, something moving in the distance even if he couldn't yet see it. The truth he had been chasing was coming faster now, pulling everything toward a point where secrets would be forced into the open. He didn't know what waited beyond the coming hours, but he knew it would change everything. And whatever it was already on its way. The rich man stood in the yard for a long time, watching the horizon settle back into its quiet shape. The tension that had pulled the land tight for days slowly unraveled, leaving only the soft rustle of grass and the low snort of the horse beside him. Everything that had built toward the moment of truth now felt strangely gentle, as if the world itself had decided to release a breath it had been holding. Inside the house, the stranger finally rested without fear clouding their eyes. The danger they had been running from had revealed itself earlier, in a way the rich man never expected. When the riders appeared at the edge of the plains, he had walked out alone, not with anger, but with steady purpose. He had listened to the frightened words of the stranger and chosen not to let their fear spread any further. The confrontation had ended not with a fight, but with truth laid bare. The riders were not hunting with cruelty, but had been searching for the stranger after a misunderstanding. The stranger had left their old town when they believed the men meant to harm them after an argument over debts and unfair treatment. But as the rich man talked with the riders, it became clear they had only wanted to make things right and ensure the stranger was safe. They never meant to chase someone into the dark places of the land. When the strangers saw the truth for themselves, the weight they had carried for so long finally broke. They cried quietly, feeling both foolish and relieved. The rich man didn't judge them. Fear had twisted their view of the world, and running had been the only thing they thought they could do. Now they could stop running at last. While the riders apologized for the confusion and promised to leave peacefully, something in the stranger changed. They no longer looked small or lost. They stood straighter, as if the land under their feet felt solid again. When the riders rode away, the stranger stayed beside the rich man without trembling. The horse stood close by, watching everything as though it had been a guardian all along. It had sensed the danger first, sensed the fear, sensed the way the stranger's heart was pulling them apart. Now it settled into calm again, lowering its head into the rich man's hand with a softness that made him smile. As the sun moved higher, the ranch grew lively again. Workers returned to their tasks, though their eyes kept drifting toward the house and the stranger who now stood outside, warming their hands under the sun. The ranch felt different, as if renewed. Even the wind moved lightly across the fields, brushing away the last hints of worry. The rich man invited the stranger to sit with him on the wooden bench near the porch. He could see they were nervous, but not with fear, more with uncertainty about what came next. He told them the ranch had space and work if they wanted to stay a while. There was no pressure to decide anything immediately. He simply wanted them to feel welcome, the way the land once made him feel when he first came there. The stranger looked out at the horse grazing in the distance. They said the horse seemed to understand them better than most people ever had. The rich man laughed softly, agreeing that animals often knew more than humans gave them credit for. The horse had guided him through this whole ordeal with its strange behavior and quiet warnings. Without it, the stranger might have gone unnoticed for much longer, maybe long enough for their fear to spiral even further. The stranger accepted the offer to stay, at least for a few days. They needed time to understand the truth they had uncovered about themselves. Running had become a habit, but safety was something new. The ranch, with its wide-open fields and steady rhythm, felt like a good place to start fresh. Days passed, and the ranch settled into a calm it hadn't known for a long time. The stranger regained their strength quickly, helping with simple chores at first, then taking on more as they felt ready. They learned how to lead the horses, how to care for them, how to walk through the land with confidence instead of fear. The horse that started it all became especially attached to the stranger. It followed them in quiet steps, nudging their shoulder with a gentle push whenever it sensed sadness or uncertainty. The bond between them deepened faster than anyone expected. Even the workers began to smile whenever they saw the pair walking side by side. The rich man watched all of this with a warm sense of satisfaction. He realized that some truths weren't just about danger and secrets. Some truths carried a chance for healing and new beginnings. His own life shifted as well. For years, he had focused on wealth and work, making sure his ranch ran without trouble. But something in him softened now. The experience had opened a door inside him, a door he didn't even know was closed. One evening, the sun dipped low and painted the sky with warm colors. The stranger approached him with a calm expression. They said they felt ready to stop running for good. They wanted to stay on the ranch, not as a guest but as part of the place. The land felt right to them, and the people made them feel safe. Most of all, the horse made them feel understood. The rich man felt a deep sense of pride. He told them they were welcome for as long as they wished. The ranch was big enough for anyone who needed a new start, especially someone who had carried so much alone. The stranger smiled, the first quiet and honest smile he had seen from them since their arrival. In the following weeks, the ranch flourished. The horses were calmer, the workers more focused, and even the fields seemed richer under the steady care the stranger provided. The rich man found himself seeking their advice often, realizing they had a natural sense for reading the land and understanding the animals. The horse they bonded with was thriving more than ever, stronger and more at ease. One crisp morning, while walking along the fence line, the stranger thanked the rich man for listening to the horse that first night. If he had ignored the strange behavior, things could have turned out much worse. The rich man knew it wasn't just about the horse's warning. It was about choosing compassion over suspicion, patience over fear. The stranger's story spread quietly across the nearby towns. People spoke softly about the ranch where someone had found safety after so much misunderstanding. Some came seeking work, others brought goods, and the ranch slowly became known as a place where kindness held real value. The rich man didn't ask for any of this, but he welcomed it with gratitude. By the time spring arrived, the ranch felt lighter and more alive. The stranger had become an important part of the ranch family, and the horse remained their closest companion. The rich man often stood on the porch watching them ride across the fields, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The truth that turned his life around wasn't just the story the stranger carried. It was the realization that wealth alone didn't make a life meaningful. What mattered were the moments when he listened, when he helped, when he opened his door to someone in need. The ranch grew not because of money, but because of the bonds that formed across it. As the day ended with golden light stretching over the fields, the rich man walked to the barn and placed a hand on the horse's neck. He thanked it quietly, knowing the animal had changed the course of not just one life, but many. The horse snorted softly and leaned into his touch as if giving its own approval. The stranger called out from the yard, waving for him to join them for supper. He smiled and walked toward the warm glow of the house. The ranch stood strong, no longer just a place of work, but a place of healing, understanding, and new beginnings. And in the calm that followed, everyone finally felt at home.